to the Empowering Women podcast. Together, we will hear from ambitious and inspiring career women as they share their stories of success and overcoming career challenges. And now, your host, Mel the Engineer.
Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Empowering Women podcast. I'm your host, Mel the Engineer, and we have another inspiring, powerful woman guest lined up for you today. A couple of items before we dive in, though. I have a message for women who are interested in taking the next steps in their career ambition. If you have some specific professional goals that you have maybe had your mind on and you're just missing a little bit of support or inspiration you need to take the next steps, then the Empowering Women in Industry Conference is for you. This is happening September 26th in Chicago. It's packed full of tools, tips, and guidance from women leaders to help you in the next steps of your career trajectory. Of course, this one-day event will also be an excellent opportunity to network with other women who can support and cheer you on in your pursuits and successes. We'd love to have you join us. So go to empoweringwomeninindustry.com for more details. That's empoweringwomeninindustry.com. Next, I'd like to share a review from iTunes. The Empowering Women team does read all of your reviews, and they mean so much to us. So today we'd like to read a review from Steph Lenz. Steph writes, "These stories of women in male-dominated fields are so inspirational. It is especially helpful to hear all the widely variable ways these women got to their current roles. The episodes are longer than many other podcasts. However, that length allows a deep dive into the stories and tips for women in male-dominated industries." Steph, thank you so much for taking the time to write this. You gave us some great feedback, and this helps us improve our podcast as we go forward. So thank you. If you haven't written a review or left a rating yet, please take a moment to do so wherever you download your podcasts from. This helps the podcast get found so that other folks can benefit from the content in the Empowering Women podcast. And that help in getting the podcast visible makes it possible for us to keep producing content over the long haul. So thank you so much for sharing a bit of your time to do this. All right, now let's get to today's guest. Today I am joined by Shereen Yusuff. Shereen has held positions in project management, business development, and customer success through her 15-year career in oil and gas. Within oil and gas, she has worked on production, drilling, and reservoirs. This is unique experience in the context of oil and gas professionals because she has worked on both the service and operator side of the industry. So, pretty cool. Shereen brings us also a truly unique cultural perspective. She grew up in her early years in Oman, later in India, and throughout her career, she's held positions in multiple different countries. So China, Brazil, several other countries, and now the US. So I think you'll find her perspective and observations really fascinating. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So without further ado, I bring you Shereen. Shereen, thank you so much for joining us today on the Empowering Women podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We are so glad you're with us. So I want to start by asking you a question about your education. My first question is, why did you decide to pursue aerospace engineering?
So, well, first of all, my background, I'm Indian. And if you know any other Indians in your life, you know that we only have two career paths we can choose from. One's engineering and the other one's medicine. So that was supposed to be a joke now. That is the only two paths we have. But it's kind of a given, you know, if you're South Asian, if that's usually the professions that our parents are more comfortable with when we choose a profession to go down with. And so I chose engineering because my dad's a doctor and my brother was going to become a doctor. And so I didn't want them to choose what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And so I decided to go down the path of engineering. Now, why aerospace engineering? Because it just sounded so cool. I thought it was super cool to become an aerospace engineer. And actually, when I studied the subject, I did think it was really, really cool. But, I very quickly recognized that in order to go down the path of aerospace, I'd have to either get a PhD or a master's degree. And I wanted my freedom as quickly as possible, and I wanted to start earning. So I went to the placement board and saw which was the career path that would give me a good salary and would give me a working environment that would have me sitting in a cubicle. And oil and gas just stuck out to me, and that's why I chose to jump from aerospace into oil and gas.
That's really interesting. Okay, so I want to come back to that oil and gas. First, if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to ask. So, as an Indian woman, do you consider yourself a person of color, or is there another term that you prefer?
Wow, no one's ever asked me that question. I guess, I am definitely brown in color, but I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way. I think I've traveled to so many different countries, and I've lived in over 10. So I guess in every country that I've lived in, I've always either not looked like the people around me, or I've definitely, my features have been very different. So, I guess I would consider myself a person of color.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Your first position out of school, was that with Schlumberger?
Yes, Schlumberger, a French-based company in the oil field services sector.
Schlumberger, okay, good to know. And that was in China, right?
Yeah, so, I was one of those lucky few who got an internship in China. So I actually started my career, I think I was 17 or 18, and I got the opportunity to go to China. And out of China, I got a pre-placement offer to work at Schlumberger, and I started my professional career in India. Spent about 3 years in India, then moved back to China for about a year, spent some time in the UK, then I moved to Louisiana. Well, Louisiana is its own country. And then after that, moved to Brazil for 2 years, and then came back to Houston for 3. Then moved to Colombia for some time, and then Ivory Coast, and then back to Houston.
Yeah, so you've seen quite a bit in your time. Let's talk a little bit more about that. So, were any of the transitions from one country to another particularly difficult? And how did you adjust? Because you mentioned all these locations and there's so many different cultures. What was that like for you?
Oh, it's a great question. So yes, the answer was it was definitely very difficult. I can talk a little about moving from the Middle East to India. That was my first move. So I was born, I guess I didn't mention this. I'm Indian by origin, but my mother is from Singapore, and I was born and raised in a country called Oman, which is in the Middle East. Which is right next to Dubai, if you're not familiar with where that is. And so I grew up in Oman, which, Oman isn't a country where they give you citizenship based on birth. So I had to take on the citizenship of my father, who was Indian. And so that's why I was Indian, being born in Oman. So I spent the first 10 years of my life in Oman, and then I moved to India for the next 10 years of my life. And that transition was, I would say that was pretty hard. And I'm not even talking about oil. I haven't even entered the oil field yet, right? So that was my first taste of, moving from one country to another and facing a different culture. But later on in life, I can talk about moving from U.S. to Brazil. You're moving to a country where nobody speaks English. The first time I faced that was actually in China. Nobody spoke English there as well. And it's just the ability to recognize that the people around you may not necessarily understand the culture you came from, And also what made sense in one country may not make sense in the other. Just the sensitivity associated with certain cultures. Like when I was born and raised in Oman, you don't really look into another person's eyes when you're talking. You don't look directly into it, especially if the person's much older than you. And then I came to the US and I recognized if you don't look at a person's eyes when you're talking to them, it almost looks like you're hiding something, and you're not confident about what you're saying. So there were all of these subtle things that I always had to pay attention. Another one was in India, you don't actually have to say good morning whenever you walk into a place. You just either say, hey, what's up? Or just hit somebody on the back, or it's very, very informal. And then you come to the US where almost everybody says good morning, and if you don't say good morning, it's almost like, well, why aren't you saying good morning to me? Should I do something? And then you go to Brazil and it's not just a good morning, but it's almost a good morning with a hug as well. And so it's just all of these subtle differences where, you go from one country to another and you just have to adapt. I guess that's the best way to put it.
That's really fascinating. Okay, so talk to us a little bit about those differences in the context of work. What kind of work were you doing during in these different places? Were you doing technical work? Were you doing something that was more people related? And how did you navigate those differences to adjust to be able to do your job well?
So it was both. It was definitely very technically related. I started off my career in drilling, and so I spent the first 12 years of my life in drilling, and then I moved to reservoir engineering for the next 2, and then now currently I'm in production engineering. So I've been technical all my life. I started, like I said, my career in India where I worked offshore. So I've only worked in offshore drilling my entire career, and I worked offshore for 3 to 4 years, where I was commuting back and forth from the platforms or the rigs that we had offshore. It's when you go to these offshore platforms or you go to these rigs, one thing's for sure, you don't really see many women. That's the first thing that's definitely comes to your attention. I think most of my career starting off, the first 2 or 3 years, I think it's slightly better now, but probably not at the rate I'd prefer it to be at. But, you'd go out to these rigs and you'd have 100, 150 people, out of which only you'd have 1 or 2 women. And so I started off with, like I said, drilling. Drilling has 3 main areas. You kind of go into the realm of operators, which, examples are Exxon, Chevron, Anadarko, Occidental. These are all companies that come in the operator sector. Then you go into the contractor company sector, which are companies like Transocean, Ensco, Neighbors. And then you go into the service sector, which are companies like Schlumberger, Halliburton, Baker Hughes. And so these companies provide services to the operator companies to be able to find and extract oil from the reservoir that we're looking for. And the contractor companies are the drill ships, or if they're onshore, then they are the rigs or the platforms, whatever is the term you'd like to use, where we actually do all of these operations on in order for us to be able to find and extract the oil. So when I started my career, I was in the services sector. I worked for Schlumberger and for 7 years. And then later on in my career, I moved to Anadarko, which is an operator company. And we're the ones who actually plan the drilling of the well, understand the expanse of the reservoir that we found, understand how many wells we should be drilling, and then put in all the infrastructure associated with producing these wells and bringing it back to shore so that it can be sold.
Could you share with us, you mentioned that there were very few women that were on these rigs. Would you feel comfortable sharing maybe a time when it was difficult for you to be working there? What did that look like, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, so I would say that in my case, the struggles weren't only from being a woman. I would say my struggles also had to do with my age. So I started working quite young. I was 20 when I first went offshore. And not only that, a lot of the places I worked at, the senior positions were definitely held by people who are not necessarily Indian either. And so, I did not understand. I would say earlier on in my career, my struggle was understanding where exactly the discrimination was coming from, if at all I was discriminated against, right? So like, for example, I would walk into the company man's office, and company man is kind of like the big boss out there. He's the guy who makes all the decisions offshore. And so, I walk into the company man's office, and, he gives me this look like, what are you doing in here? And so now I don't know if the view or the way he looks at me is because I'm a woman. Is it because I'm just really young? Like, I didn't know exactly where was the look coming from, And 9 out of 10 times, that was really the biggest struggle that I had, which was walking into a situation, and when people would look at me weird or would look at me like, why are you talking? Or why are you giving your opinion? I couldn't figure out if it was because of my age or if it was because of my gender, right? So, things like, I'd be sitting in meetings where I'd be leading a team, and the big boss would ask a question and I would answer it, and he would almost like not even look at me. He would just look at the guy across the table who was technically not the leader of the group, because I was the one leading the group, and he would ask the same question to that guy, And again, was it because he was a man, or was it because he was older than me, So I guess those were really where the struggles came from, not understanding where exactly or which direction it was coming from.
Interesting. So how has your experience changed with that time?
So drilling was an interesting time for me. I'm very grateful that I actually got that experience very early on in my life, because, as a girl and being in a very male-dominated environment, I think one important factor that you have to have is the ability to be confident, to be able to give your opinion. And yes, maybe in the beginning, it might be a little difficult for people to actually listen to you and hear what you have to say. But if you keep speaking up and keep standing up and keep giving your opinion, then one day it is bound to be heard, right? I'm not going to say that it wasn't a struggle earlier on in my life. I will definitely say, though, that because you're the only girl, sometimes if you do a good job, it does get highlighted, And in the same account, if you don't do a good job, it also gets highlighted. So it's almost like you're in the spotlight no matter what you do, right? And so keeping that in mind, drilling is a very high pressure environment where you have to make decisions on the fly. You have to be able to plan ahead, because if plan A doesn't work, then you have to look at plan B. If plan B doesn't work, you have to have a plan C. And so even planning the jobs are a whole different level of project management, And so having that experience very early on in my life, I believe has made me the person that I am. That is, be confident, stand up in meetings, be able to present to people, not worrying about, not knowing my information, because if at all I didn't, I have the ability to recognize that I am a hardworking individual, and it's easy for me to say, no, I don't know the answer to this. I will find out and get back to you. Right. So, and it's different. Like if you look at the oil field in general, you'll notice that there are very few girls in drilling. There are definitely more in production and reservoir. And it doesn't mean that production and reservoir are any easier than drilling. Drilling just has always had this image of because you have to go offshore to platforms, which, by the way, you have to do when you're a production engineer as well. But it's always had this, I don't know how to define it, but it's kind of got this image of being a very hard environment to work in. People aren't as patient. It's really go, 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 go. And so over time, I will say that I have changed as a person in terms of when I started off in my career, I had very few female role models. And so I didn't really have anybody to look up to and understand what should my personality be like in this environment. All I had were men around me to look up to. And, they're all very, very men with very strong personalities, right? And so as I've grown older, I've seen that I have mellowed down a lot. I'm probably a lot more patient today than I was in the past. I'm a lot more giving in terms of my time and in terms of my advice to younger engineers. I think there was a time, when I was in my early 20s, I'm 35 now, but in my early 20s, I remember thinking when women would come offshore and I would look at them, and they would struggle to lift a tool or they would do something that would potentially, kind of make it look like they weren't as strong as they need to be. I would think, oh my God, why can't they be stronger? Why can't they lift it? Like, we don't want to show the men that we're weak, And today I don't even think that way. I just look at it as no, let's help each other. Let's be out there. Let's figure out a way that we can do this together because we're a team and we all move forward together, right? So I've definitely changed. I've mellowed down a lot over the years.
Thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to share with us and learn from other inspiring career women. I wanted to take a moment to ask if you heard this part of what Shereen said. Not long ago, she said, "You're in the spotlight no matter what you do." This stood out to me because it reminded me of a quote that goes, "As a woman in science and engineering, you stand out no matter what you do. You may as well stand out at the front." As a woman in a male-dominated space, are you using your excellent talents to stand out? I think that's something worth reflecting on. In addition to building confidence for yourself, what other advice would you give to women listening, either in oil and gas or in other male-dominated spaces?
I would say you're not alone. If whatever struggle you're facing, you're not alone. So don't ever think that you can't talk about it, right? I think I struggled with that growing up. I say growing up, but I mean, like when I first started working, I didn't really have many women to talk with, and I didn't have many women to share what I was going through with. And just knowing that there are people out there that I can go and talk to makes a huge difference. And I believe today we're so in such in a much better position compared to where we used to be, right? So, we have social media, we have LinkedIn, we have all of these connecting circles, we have different groups in cities. I'm a part of so many. Almost every company today has like a women's networking circle. And it's really good to be a part of those networking circles, to meet other women. And I won't say that, right off the bat, you go and you share all of your stories and all of your struggles with everybody that you meet, but kind of, feel it out, meet people, connect with them. And over time, when you feel that you can trust this person with, sharing some things that you've struggled with, go ahead and open up and do it, because I think the best feeling that you can have is recognizing that somebody else understands what you're going through. And when they do, and maybe they've been in that position, or maybe they know someone who's been in that position, they can help you understand how to maneuver in that pathway, or what to do in that specific pathway, right? So yeah, that would be my advice, to reach out, connect with other women. And, I will also add that in my life, I've actually not necessarily had a female manager, but I have actually reached out to other women who are managers, and I have talked to them, even if they're not in the same line as me. It's okay. When I was in drilling, I would talk to people in production, and it's nice to even get a different outlook sometimes of other areas that you're not even aware of. And so that's what I would say.
Okay, my next question is kind of twofold. So I want to ask, what would you like to see change in the oil and gas industry? But I'd also like to ask, what have you seen oil and gas companies do well in recent years, particularly in the context of supporting women coming into the field?
So one of the biggest changes, I would say, is how women are probably treated offshore. And I don't mean that it used to be bad before, but there are some things that are probably highlighted now that may not have been highlighted in the past. So to give you an example, when I first started my career, I would go into rigs where, there wouldn't be bathrooms that are specific to a room. So you'd have like a dorm bathroom, like an area where people just go and utilize the restroom areas. And that's far and few now. Most of the platforms these days are platforms or rigs have facilities. And let me put this out there that I'm not saying all of them are this way. I'm saying a lot of them now have ways for women to have privacy, to be able to go to their own restroom and have their own areas where they can actually sleep with other women in the same room. Now, there are a lot of challenges associated with accommodation because when you go offshore, accommodation is very tight. So, room space is very, very little. And so it's, kind of one of those things about you always have to look at how we can optimize space, right? And so, these are always something that we're constantly battling with, and we're constantly figuring out ways where we can actually have more women offshore without necessarily skewing or having too many rooms assigned that don't have any women don't have men being able to go into those rooms. So this is a constant struggle, and where it's a work in progress. The other area I would say is one thing in the oil field is because it's a global commodity, we've always had a lot of diversity. So we've always had people from different countries. We've had different, backgrounds. And that's always been one of the things I've loved most about the oil field is you're working with people from different countries all the time. I will say that we can probably do a better job in having more women. But we have definitely increased numbers. Now, I can't speak for the entire offshore or oil and gas industry in general, but I will say just in my team alone, currently where I work in production, we probably have as many women as engineers as we have men. And so it's really cool to see that today. Can I say that this is the case all across the board? No, I cannot, right? I can't say that I know what is happening in every single company around the world. I don't know what's going on there, but I definitely around me from, all these countries that I've traveled to and I've worked in, I'm definitely seeing a lot more presence of women around.
Let's talk a little bit more about production and your current work. What is production in this context, and what does your current role and responsibilities look like?
So I'm a production engineering manager. I manage 4 of the platforms that we have in Central Gulf of Mexico. I have about a team of about 8 or 9 people who report to me. That includes engineers that go offshore and engineers that work in the office. And my main role is to actually help my engineers do the best job that they can do. And so I'll talk about what a production engineer needs to do. They actually are constantly looking at well surveillance. So we have all of these wells that we drill, and then we bring them online and we start producing from them. And along the course of the life of the well, there are things that could potentially happen that would reduce the production from these wells. And so the responsibility of the production engineer is to ensure that these wells are producing as they were expected to produce or they were predicted to produce. And in the event they haven't, try to understand why they're not producing the way they were supposed to, and figure out remediations associated with getting them back to the original plan. And in addition to all of that, there are other areas, right? Like they also look at, helping marketing with forecasting the volume of oil that we'll be selling for that particular month. They're consistently being the liaison with what's happening in the office associated with the plans that we're expecting to do and the people who work offshore. So it's almost like a project management role where they've got a number of things going on. And obviously, if anything comes up that requires some sort of troubleshooting, they have to get the larger group together and we kind of move from there.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit. So you've got a team that you lead and manage now. What would you say are your core values as a manager and leader?
So I think the most important thing for me is I believe in open communication. And so how I instill that in my people is by going and seeing them as often as I can, and also helping them realize that I really do care about what they think. And so I always tell them, if you have a thought, or if you're not sure if you want to share something, you can trust me. You can use me as a sounding board. You can come to me and talk to me about an idea that you have. And if you feel that it is too out of the box, or you don't know how to go about it, then I'll help you get there. But I don't ever want you to think that there is anything that comes to your mind that you cannot share with me. And I don't only mean this from a professional standpoint, I also take it to the personal level as well. Because for me, somebody who even has personal issues, it will come to work. And so I want my people to be happy, and I want them to come to the workplace knowing that they have a family at the workplace as well. And there should never, ever be a situation where they feel either ashamed, or they feel like it's difficult, or they feel like it's something that they just do not want to share because I'm not approachable. So this is, I would say for me, the most important thing is the ability for me to make them feel comfortable to openly communicate with me. Now, I use a lot of strategies to do that, obviously, because I have introverts and extroverts in my team. And, there'll be meetings that we're sitting together, and I'll ask an open-ended question to kind of understand how everybody feels about it. There'll always be the extroverts that raise their hand and they talk about it, But when it comes to the introverts, I usually always go after the fact and reach out to them and talk to them personally and get their opinion as well. And kind of keep doing that consistently to the point that even the introverts feel comfortable to actually share their opinion at the table. I believe a sign of a good manager is a person who walks into a room and the tone of the room does not change. And so I look at the people who report to me as my subordinates. They're not just people I manage. They're my colleagues as well.
Thank you so much for articulating that. I love the way that you described that. And it reminded me a little bit of a woman I interviewed in an earlier episode, Seppi Sadie, and she said something in a similar way that, she felt like it was her responsibility to make sure people could bring their full selves to work. And if you're upset about something that's going on in your personal life, there's no way to not bring that to work. And so, if we can create an environment for our teams and our colleagues, as you described, where they feel comfortable opening up, they're going to be better teammates, better workers. It's just better and healthier for everyone involved, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is something challenging that you have learned as a manager, and how did it unfold?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll give you a little bit of context. This is actually my second stint as a manager. So when I was working at Schlumberger, I became a manager at 24. So I was a very young manager at the time. And, I was a manager from the ages of 24 to 27. And then I I moved from the service sector to the operator sector. And then when I made that move, in the operator sector, I started off as an engineer again. And then now I'm a manager. So I've done this managerial stint twice in my life, right? And so I'll talk about the first time I became a manager, because that's really when the struggles happened. So, I walked in I just came to the U.S. I had just walked into the U.S. and I had just come in from India and China. And, the culture in the East is very, very different from the culture in the West, right? So in India, if we had to get a tool ready to be sent offshore, there were maybe 20 to 25 steps that we had to do, from, writing the tool order to sitting with the technician and understanding if the tool was okay or not, to go into the logistics and figuring out if, is everything okay with the movement of this tool, to following up with the boat company, to following up with the company man on the rig side. I mean, it was just one after the other. It was almost like the field engineer was running the job, right? And, this was what I was used to. And then I came to the US, and out of the 20 steps, I was told that all I had to do were about 2 or 3, right? And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing, right? Like, I have all of this extra time on my hands. And so what do? I just go ahead and start doing all of these different things, right? So I learn a bit about other areas. I'm sitting in for my manager whenever they go on vacation. I'm just doing all of these other tasks, which, in reality, it was only because I had a lot of time on my hands compared to what I used to do when I was back in India, And, my manager and my manager's manager really appreciated the work that I did. And so they kind of told me, we think you're ready to be a manager. You should, we think you've done all of these roles, and, it would be good to become a manager. And so, I was just ecstatic. Of course, I thought, oh my God, this is an incredible opportunity, becoming a manager at 24. So cool, and, my head was just like rushing and racing with adrenaline. And I was just really, really ecstatic, right? The part that I did not, I guess I did not see or predict or, was the people who would be reporting to me. Some of them had a lot of seniority. And I would say a majority of them were actually senior engineers who probably had a little more seniority than me, and who were probably more technically adept than I was. But, because I had just come in from this other country, and I was in America, it was a new country, new role, new everything, I just spent all this time not necessarily socializing and getting to know people around me, but just kind of like working and doing all of these extra things, which obviously is what got me the promotion. But when I got the promotion, I now had a pool of people who weren't very happy reporting me, because they looked at me as, well, where did this girl come from? Like, she just walked in. She just spent like 6 or 7 months here. And I mean, we don't really even know who she is or what her background is. And next thing we know, we're reporting to her, right? That didn't go very well. It was definitely a very tough period in my life, and again, being in India and coming to the US, the managerial style was very different in India than compared to the US. In the US, people almost need to feel that there is a reason of why they're asked to do something. They need to understand why they're doing something. It's important for them to feel that they're contributing in a way, right? Which, by the way, now in hindsight, when I look back, I think that's amazing, right? But back in that time, I mean, this is what we're talking 15 years ago. I thought to myself, well, I mean, we've all got a job. We're all being paid to do what we're doing. Why do I have to actually explain to people why they're doing what they're doing? It was so foreign to me, because, the Asian culture, it's like, you have a job, you do what you're doing, and we just do it because we have to earn money and so on and so forth. And by the way, things have changed there as well. So this is, I'm talking 10, 12 years ago now. And so, I had to completely change the person that I was. I had to read a lot of books on generational analysis, understanding what Gen X meant, what Gen Y meant. I had to understand how people thought. I had to understand how to reach out to my people. What did giving time mean? Why was it important for me to actually help them understand why they were doing what they were doing? It was a complete shift in the way I thought, in the way I worked, not in the past, I would expect people to tell me in advance that they were setting up a meeting, what time they wanted to meet with me. And I completely went into an open door policy. So it was a major shift in my life, in the way I had to learn to become a manager from where I was. And obviously this time around, I walked into it with the same attitude when I was back in Schlumberger. So it's obviously been a lot better this time around.
You've mentioned a lot of things that I would put into a category of sort of emotional intelligence. So earlier you mentioned recognizing team members as introverts and extroverts. You've certainly touched on the variety of cultures that you've worked with. And now, most recently, you mentioned these sort of different generations and what those mean. So I was just wondering, are there any resources or books that you've read that stand out to you as being really good or really helpful for helping you grow as a professional and a leader?
Wow, I wish I had written books down. Actually, come to think of it, I'm sure there are, but I will say that Google is an incredible source. You know, even if you put a generational gap, you will get a lot of material that you can read on Gen X and Gen Y. And from there, you can actually move on towards what is the topic that you actually want to go into more. I will make a special mention of a book which really helped me looking at women in a more powerful way. Because I think I had to change the way I looked at women as well. Because again, this has a lot to do with my background, you know, growing up in Oman, being in the Middle East, where, you know, it isn't necessary that men and women are always looked upon as equal. And like I said, we've come a long way, right? And things have changed a lot. But, you know, I felt along the course of my life, I noticed that there were things in the past that were okay for me, which today I recognize is absolutely unacceptable, you know? And so a good book that really helped me with that resonance associated with how I should look at other women and how I want to respect other women and how I want to honor other women is this book called Rise, Sister, Rise. And it's a beautiful book about how women, it's a book written by a woman who talks about how she learned how to honor the female power within her and how she spreads that to the other women as well.
Excellent. Thank you for the recommendation. So I will look that up, and I'll definitely put a link for that book in the show notes. And if you think of others later, you can send them to me, and I can add those to the show notes page.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You're listening to the Empowering Women podcast. You can listen to this episode again and our other episodes for free on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. We are especially grateful for every rating, review, and when you share the Empowering Women podcast with others. There's really no better compliment. Learn more about our show and access show notes by visiting empoweringwomenpodcast.com. That's empoweringwomenpodcast.com. Ask, related to what you were just describing, how would you like to see women supporting women in this field? And if you have any specific thoughts on supporting women of color as well, I'd love to hear that too.
So the most common thing I've seen is whenever I talk to other women, they always have this, you know, when I become a manager or when I become this or when I become that. And I truly feel you can do a lot just exactly where you're at. Even if you've been in a company for 6 months, even if you are in college, even if you're in school, even if you've been in the company for 10 years, it doesn't matter what phase of life you're in, what your career path is, or where you're at. I think you can make a difference no matter where you're at. And so this has been the biggest challenge for me. And it's also a thing that I always tell people everywhere I go is you are a walking, talking role model for all the women around you. And so how would you, if you look at the future and you wonder, where would you want to see women in the future? Then have an image of what that looks like. And you become that, right? So when you're putting it into perspective that way, then everybody starts recognizing that you don't need somebody who is a prime minister or a president or somebody who actually leads the country to be able to have that role model to look up to. You have role models around you everywhere. every single person around you. Of course, we're talking about women specifically here right now, but I genuinely believe this is for men as well, because women can't go up, or whatever is the word that you want to say, move forward or go up or whatever, with only 50% of the population, or 51% of the population. We need the other 49% to be on board as well, right? So increasing the awareness of these topics within the men in your offices, and also being able to recognize yourself as a leader in that realm is so important. And how can you do that, right? So the way you do that is having a little more of a prominent role in your company's circles, whether it's a women's gathering in your company, or it could be you in your own team having a way to connect with the other women, even if there were 5 or 6, and starting from there and then potentially growing over time. I have personally seen that whenever I go to these events, so I go to OTC every year. OTC is the Offshore Technology Conference that happens in Houston, and I'm very passionate about it. And this year, because I'm a manager now, I took the girls and my team to this conference, and it was in this conference that we all attended a gender diversity presentation. And it's just good to, as a leader, if you actually do have a position that is of a leadership level, then take the time and the effort, or make the time and the effort to take the women in your group, or even if it's not in your immediate group, in your extended group, to conferences outside, have meetings with them, talk to them, ask them what their struggles are, reach out to other women in other areas. I have girls and women reaching out to me from college, from school, from within Anadarko, from outside Anadarko. I try to make myself as reachable and as available as possible, right? And I get it. I understand that it requires a lot of time and effort and energy, but I'm not saying that I'm catering to 1,000 people per day. I look at it as, even if I'm able to make an impact on one life, that is so much better than none. So once you start looking at things like that I can make a difference. I don't have to wait for anybody else. I don't have to look at my manager and think, oh, my manager should do this, or my CEO should do this, or the C-level suite should do this. I can make a difference. I can make an impact. I can write a blog. I can reach out to women. I can put myself out there. Like me right now doing this podcast is me doing just that, right? It's making myself available. And more and more women should do this. We shouldn't shy away from what our responsibility is. This is our responsibility to make the path, to pave the path for the women that are coming in to not go through the life that we did, And I took a pledge or an oath, you can call it whatever, about 10 years ago, where I would never ever say, well, I did it, then why don't you go through something like that? No, that my attitude changed 10 years ago, where I decided whatever I went through in my life, it is important that the next generation doesn't go through the struggles that I went through. And, you asked me about women of color as well. It's the same thing. I think I have the same opinion about that as well. I look at women with color and with exactly the same passion. So it's all the same for me.
You touched on several things there that I think are really important, and I just want to kind of re-highlight. You mentioned that we're all role models and we can all make an impact. I completely agree with that. And, you also mentioned that we need the men on board with these initiatives. I completely agree. Earlier when we were talking, you did say that you haven't had that many women superiors. There's just not as many women in the oil and gas industry as men, even though that is slowly changing over time. I was just wondering if there have been any mentors that stand out to you, and if you might describe how they helped you. I'm assuming that it's probably a man or several different men.
Yeah. So this is a good question, because I don't really have a mentor, if I think about it. I haven't had any one single mentor, but I will say that I have almost looked at everyone that I've crossed paths with that impressed me in some form or fashion as a mentor. And I would reach out to them and I would talk to them and I would ask them that about that specific thing that really impressed me, right? I'll give you a couple of examples. So, very early on in my career, I think I mentioned the story about, me getting promoted at 24. So the person who was behind that was a man who I'm still in touch with, actually, and he really showed me what thinking outside the box meant. I never really, I was one of those girls who was very book smart. You showed me a manual, I would read every page. I knew everything about the tool exactly as it was in the book. But he would throw these questions out at me, which would make me look at him and think, but that's not how the tool is meant to work. That's not how the tool works. And he would say, but no, Shereen, I'm asking you, what if I could change the setting? What if I could put another bandwidth into it? What if I could utilize it at another frequency? What would happen then? What difference would it make? And it was that switch in thinking from this is handed down to me and this is how I need to just follow the rules towards going to a place where I started realizing I can create. I don't always have to follow. I can actually lead, right? So he was very instrumental in bringing this aspect into my mind. I would like to also mention a lady who, when I came to the US for the first time in 2008, I remember, and I'll actually mention her name. Her name's Stephanie Cox, and she still has a very, very high role in Schlumberger, I believe. And, at the time when I came in, if I remember correctly, I think she was the vice president. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, women can do such roles. Like, she was the first woman that I saw that actually had a vice president role. And coming from where I came from, I didn't even know that this was even possible, that a woman could even have such a role. So I remember looking at her and I remember thinking she spoke with so much grace. She was in front of a large group of people and she was confident and she had a lot of poise and she relayed her message in not an overbearing and overpowering fashion, but in a very confident fashion. And I remember looking at her thinking, that's the kind of leader I want to be. She exuded so much grace, and it was something that I had not seen till that point. And so this is why I say that it is important to have role models at a certain level where you can look up to and you can say, yeah, I'd like to emulate that, And then there's one more, and this is actually somebody who is not a part of my professional life. She's actually somebody in my personal life, and she's one of my closest friends right now, and she's 61 years old at the moment, and she can probably give anybody a run for their money with the energy that she has, And I remember, growing up, I'm somebody who has a lot of energy, and I'm always running around, and I'm doing a million things at the same time, and people would always make the same comment, how long do you think you can do this for, Shereen? How long do you think you can have this kind of energy? How long do you think you can be this young, right? And when I met her, she's 61 and she was 59 at the time. And I remember seeing her, I met her at a dance event and she was dancing and she was flittering around and twirling and doing all of these energetic things. And I remember we connected because I was so in awe of this woman, and I walked up to her and I talked to her and she told me her age. And I just remember thinking, wow, I'm going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. So I can't specifically say there was ever one single mentor I can talk about, but there have been so many people that have come into my life where I have seen and I have looked at them and I've thought, I want to have that personality trait. I want to be like that. I want to do that. Even if it was a job, there would be people that were doing a certain role, or they would come up and they would talk about something in a conference or whatever. And I would think, wow, that job looks really cool. I want to know more about the job. So I would walk up to them and I would ask them about that job in specific. And they would tell me all the things that I wanted to know. And, I guess I realized that people love to share. They love to talk about things. If you are genuinely interested in what they have to offer, or you're genuinely interested in what they're passionate about, you will never find someone looking at you thinking, oh, you're wasting my time, please go away, because they notice the interest that you have. They notice that you're looking up to them and they have inspired you in a certain way. And if they feel that, they absolutely will want to share.
I could not agree with you more, Shereen. Okay, we're coming to the end of my questions. So I'd like to ask, what in your work are you most passionate about?
That's funny you say that because I feel like I'm passionate about a lot of things. So I really, really am passionate about my people. I think if I could choose one thing, it's relationships. And without relationships, there is no meaning to anything for me. I don't want to get any place, or I'm not striving to be a leader of a big company, or I'm not striving to go anywhere or be the next vice president or anything like that. I just want to be the best possible manager to the people that I have with me right now. I want them to come to work every day very happy, and I want them to feel that they belong to a family. That is so important to me because I have been in situations where I didn't feel like that. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like I was a part of a family. And I don't ever want my people to ever feel like that, right? So I think the best feeling is one where I walk in and I look at the people around me and I ask them, how are they doing? And they genuinely tell me how they're doing, not always tell me that they're happy or they're good or whatever. And my people do that. So that is what I'm the most passionate about. I'm passionate about the relationships I make. I'm passionate about the people that I work with. And I just always want them to feel that I'm there for them.
What are you most passionate about outside of work? Is there something you're involved with that you would want to share with us?
So outside of work, I actually teach breath work. So I'm a breath coach, and I teach people how to breathe. And I'm also into this method. I'm a certified Wim Hof method coach. It's this method that teaches you how to break into your autonomous nervous system and reset your circulatory, endocrine, nervous, and respiratory systems to give you a healthy life. And so the way we look at it is if you're healthy, then you're obviously happy. So happiness lies within us. And it's a way to go into that into a more deeper level. And I also teach people how to move. So I'm into functional movement. I teach joint mobility. When we start, I like to talk about it as 3 stages. When you're younger and you grow up and you're kind of like in your 20s or your teens, you're concerned about the exterior. You're concerned about, wanting to attract other people, and you want to look good. And so, you go to the gym and you're trying to lose weight and you're lifting all of these dumbbells and working on your biceps and triceps. And now I look at all of that as like level 1, right? We're trying to appease the outside world and increase our self-esteem by the way we look on the outside. And then you go into the next level where, you're working more on your tendons and your fascia and your muscles and your ligaments. And it's about, taking care of your body from within. That's where, yoga, joint mobility, all of these practices kind of come in. And then the third level, which is where you work not just on your body, but also on your brain. And you kind of work on all of these different areas of trying to figure out how you can capitalize on all of your brain, not only certain parts of your brain. And you kind of bring about the mind-body alignment. And that's the third level. And that's where the Wim Hof method, Joe Dispenza, if you've heard of all these people, that's kind of where they come in. So I'm very, very passionate about these methods as well. So yeah, this is what I do outside of work.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so that was really my last question. I'd just like to open it up if there's anything else that you personally want to share with an audience of a variety of different types of women that are in various male-dominated fields. Is there anything that you would like to share with them?
Absolutely. Yes, I'd like to share something. The question you asked about struggles, I wanted to make a comment about the fact that the struggles never go away. They just morph over time, and as we grow older, we gain skills, or we have a skill set that helps us deal with these struggles as we move on, And I know as a woman, we have so many different kinds of struggles that come into our lives, whether it's through our personal life, whether it's through marriage, whether it's through children, whether it's through, our family, whatever it is, the whole work-life balance concept and so on and so forth. struggles never go away. They always morph. And so I always say, as we go forth in our journey, it never gets easier. We only get stronger. And I genuinely believe that we get stronger when we are together. So the more we work together, the stronger we are as a force. I don't look at someone who works in the medical field or someone who works in the nuclear sector any different from me. I don't look at other women in other areas as people that I don't have commonalities with. We all have something in common, and it is easy for us to relate. So I would like to talk about intersectional thinking. We have to have more intersectional thought, and we have to have conferences where we bring people in from different backgrounds talking about their areas and open up the avenue for us to reach out to people in these different areas and segments of profession. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that at the end of the day, agreed, this is about women's empowerment, but it really starts from a young age. And I'm very passionate about how our young girls and our daughters and our children are raised and how we teach them how to do things, So as a child, I was told so many things growing up. Shereen, look at you, because I grew up playing tennis and that was my main sport, and my hands would be covered with blisters, and everybody would hold my hand and say things like, oh my gosh, who's going to marry this girl? Her hands are so blistered up, I've never heard a man being told this, right? Who's going to marry a man because his hands are so rough? I've never heard this. And so we have to start becoming aware of the things that we say around our girls, the words that we use around them, the things that we expose them to. Cooking and cleaning, they're all very good. Even men should be exposed to that. I have absolutely no issue with that. But, girls can play with Legos as well, and girls can do a lot of things. And, I know in the US, it's not as bad as other areas because I've had exposure in India and Oman and Africa and so on and so forth. And it is getting a lot better. I'm so grateful that I came to the US where I can see the things that women do here, and it makes me feel so empowered. But we have to remember that it starts at a young age. So it's not only for the women, but also for the men. We always have to be cognizant of how we talk to our little girls. If I fall down, it's okay. It's okay. I can get up and I can brush off my knee, and that doesn't make me look ugly. Having scars on my body doesn't make me look ugly. I just wanted to make a note of that as well.
I love that. I was just recently with some friends, and they have a little baby girl, and whenever she falls, everybody says "wee," and then they clap. Because it's exactly like you said, we can get up and we teach these types of concepts to our kids at a very young age. And yes, absolutely, I agree. We have to be cognizant of how we speak to kids in general, because, like the example that you gave, if you're speaking to, a daughter in that way and the son overhears that teaches him a lesson as well in terms of how women are to be thought of and treated. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I cannot explain to you how many times I have heard this. I mean, it's shocking almost how many times, I work with a lot of men who are so respectful to me, and they work with me and they honor me, and it's great. Yet at the same time, they would say things like, oh, I would never allow my daughter to do this job. I would never allow my daughter. And I would ask them, how can you say that? Your attitude and your personality makes a direct impact on your kids, and that's why politicians breed politicians, actors breed actors. It's engineers breed engineers. And so if you are in an environment where you are consistently looking up to your parents, when you're at a young age, are who you idolize. And so you want to do the things to impress your parents, whether you like it or not. This is the truth. And so if you look at your parents and you think that, oh, my mom or my dad doesn't want me to do this in my life, or doesn't want me to become a drilling engineer, or doesn't want me to go down this path, it's going to directly impact the girl, But again, all said and done, we've come a long way from where it used to be. I mean, there are now women who are firefighters. I've heard a number of podcasts on such women, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful to hear such women speak up more and more, because it shows that it is possible. Women can truly do whatever we put our minds to.
Absolutely. Shereen, thank you so much for sharing time with us today. You've got such a wonderful message, and I really appreciate you sharing some of your time and thoughts.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And if somebody listening wants to find you, where can they reach out to you?
I'm on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn profile is LinkedIn, I think /in/Shereen Yusuff. And I'm on Instagram as well. My Instagram is going to be a lot of pictures of me in ice baths, because that's a part of what I do for the Wim Hof method. But I'm on Instagram as well at Shereen Yusuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. It was a real pleasure.
Oh, and Mel, I want to thank you too. Thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really powerful what you're doing, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for sticking around to the end. I really loved speaking with Shereen. What amazing perspective she has, both as a woman of color, but also as a human who has lived and worked literally across the globe. Just amazing and inspirational. Shereen did send over a couple of other books she wanted to recommend by email. So you'll remember earlier in the episode she mentioned a book called Rise, Sister, Rise. That's by Rebecca Campbell. And then by email, she also specifically wanted to call out 2 books. So one of them is called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. It's by Richard Bach. And then also a book called Heroes, Empower Yourself, Your Coworkers, Your Company. So I've got those titles and links to where you can purchase those books in the show notes. If you go to empoweringwomenpodcast.com, you can find those details and more on the website. That's empoweringwomenpodcast.com. We only have a couple more episodes left in the season. If you want to catch up with us and provide feedback in person, why not come out to the Empowering Women in Industry Conference? We're so excited to have a day full of inspirational women leaders sharing their knowledge with us, and we would love to have you there learning and networking with us. So find details about that at empoweringwomeninindustry.com. Again, that's going to be in September 2019, of course, in Chicago. We'd love to see you there. Until next time, take care, and here's to your success.
Thank you for joining us for an episode of the Empowering Women Podcast with Mel the Engineer. If you find the Empowering Women Podcast helpful, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts. Our show is a partnership between Mel the Engineer and the Empowering Women in Industry organization. Learn more by visiting empoweringwomenpodcast.com.